This episode is brought to you by the local Palette Cookbook Club. Drinking is an essential part of Korean culture, guided by a complex web of unspoken rules, and today's guest has written a guide all about it. Welcome to Everything Cookbooks, the podcast for writers, readers, and cooks. I'm Kate Leahy, and today I'm here with Molly Stevens. Hey, Molly.
Hello, Kate.
So, Molly, before reading the book that we're going to talk about today, how much did you know about soju?
Honestly, I knew what it is, and I've certainly had soju, but I knew very little of what I learned after reading Soju Party, the cookbook. I knew it was a Korean alcohol that was pretty light, neutral tasting, but I've heard people say, oh, it's Korean sake.
Which
I've learned it's not.
It's definitely not, right?
No, I've heard it called Korean vodka, which I knew that wasn't true. But no, I had no idea. There's so much to it. How about you?
I was always confused about the alcohol level because I had heard it was a spirit, but then I thought, but it's not a spirit like vodka is a spirit in terms of alcohol quantity. So I was always kind of wondering where it fit. It wasn't a wine, but it kind of acted like a wine in the lower alcohol quantity. So I guess I just really didn't go into the history of it until this book, which lays it out and also lays out all the other Korean alcohols like makgeolli and all these other things that are having this. Well, Korean culture across the world is having this moment, and there's this wave of enthusiasm about it, probably because the Korean government has been promoting Korean culture since the 90s. And it's like all this work is now hitting sort of this past decade. We've just learned so much. We've been exposed to so much.
Well, especially around Korean food and drink. And to be clear, the book Soju Party by Irene Yoo that we're talking about today is not just about soju. It as you're saying, it talks about other alcohols, but it is a cookbook because it's not just Korean drinking culture, it's Korean eating and drinking culture, but the two go hand in hand.
They go hand in hand, and you don't drink without eating in Korea. That's like rule number one. But Irene is such a really interesting creator. She's done so many different things. And one thing that I think people who are really visually minded will love about this book is just how much it pops off the page. Yeah. She has a background in photo editing, and we'll talk to her about that. Irene Yoo is a food writer, a recipe developer, a creator. She has a YouTube channel, and she's a chef. She was raised in LA, and she spent a lot of time in Korea as well growing up. And she previously worked as a photo and video producer for the Food Network. And now she is a co-owner of Orion Bar in Brooklyn, and soju is her first cookbook. So let's bring her on. Irene, welcome to Everything Cookbooks.
I'm so excited to be here. This is truly my favorite podcast. I don't listen to a lot of podcasts, but this one, I listen to in the car, I listen to in the shower, I listen to everywhere. So I'm so excited to be here.
That's amazing.
Yeah, congratulations on Soju Party. We were talking right before we recorded. I had a question for you about the outfits that you were wearing when you were promoting your book. We're going to get into it in the book, but just as a teaser for listeners, stay tuned for what she was wearing and the importance of the color green.
But Irene, before we get to the book, I read that you started doing pop-ups around New York. Pop-up bars, which we hear a lot about pop-up restaurants, but we don't hear a lot about pop-up bars. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I started doing pop-ups under the moniker You Eating back, I think it was like 2013 or so. And this was before Korean food really became what it is, which is so amazing. It was just starting to creep up and become a thing where the time when I knew I was ready to do it was when I no longer had to explain to people what kimchi is or what gochujang is. And so people started to gain a bit of a shorthand, but I think a lot of people still didn't really know very much about it outside of things like bibimbap or Korean barbecue. And a lot of the Korean chefs that I was seeing were not really doing Korean food in the way that I grew up with. So I grew up eating my mom's Korean food. She was an amazing cook, very dedicated, even though she will say she's not. But she made 3 home-cooked meals a day. We went to Korea every summer growing up. So like she really immersed us into like the education and the culture. And I really missed that when I left home, obviously, because that was literally the food of my childhood. And as I was sort of going out into the world and exploring and learning about other cultural cuisines, I was continuing to find thorough lines into the food that I grew up with. So I would have like Vietnamese food and be like, oh, pho and this like deep broth is really similar to something like tang, which is like a Korean beef bone broth soup, or like Cuban food and being like, oh, they also have like slow cooked pork, and then maybe like these elements of like kimchi could like go into like a hot sauce to be paired into like a Cuban sandwich or something like that. So that's what really inspired the pop-up, and that's something I did with my then boyfriend, now husband, and partner slash co-owner of my bar, Ryan Bar, for about 7 years, 8 years. And then right when I was like, all right, I don't really want to do this anymore, it was COVID. So the timing kind of worked out nicely.
Were the pop-ups food and drink?
It was actually more food
Oh,
at
okay.
bars. It is confusing. I did pop-ups at bars because especially in New York, a lot of bars have like very tiny or non-existent kitchen spaces. They're always looking for ways and reasons to bring people in. So a lot of places were looking for like semi-permanent, permanent pop-ups. I really wanted to kind of do more one-offs where every pop-up I did was a different theme or exploration and menu. So I did them like initially like once a month, and I had like a full-time job at the time. So that was kind of untenable to maintain for 8 years.
What was your full-time job at the time?
I was the photo producer at Food Network. So that's kind of what also sparked my like interest in diving like headfirst into food. I had been working like corporate for a long time, so it like gave me a little bit of like time and space to want to explore my creativity outside of it.
Before Food Network, were you in food or were you in a completely different corporate world?
I started out in photo and photo production. So I originally started at a photo software company, and then one of our clients was Food Network. And then a few years in, the photo director there was looking for a photo manager. So I was like originally started as a digital asset manager, which is someone who's kind of like a archivist slash distributor. So I would like get all the photos from all of our shows, process them, distribute them out to all of our different departments. And then I kind of moved into producing our unit stills, which is the photographers who go on set of the show and shoot photos, as well as like our marketing shoots, like on Seamless and, you know, get with all the celebs and the talent. And then I eventually moved into, I was like interim photo director at Food Network for a while. And then I also worked as the photo director for Magnolia Network, which is the channel that was started by Chip and Joanna Gaines from HGTV.
But you were not in a commercial kitchen at this space. You were working with photo teams.
No.
And then so on your side hustle, you're really in the kitchen, you're cooking and you're bringing the food you're making to bars.
Exactly. Like it really developed my interest. Like I always really wanted to work at Food Network growing up, like in college. That's how I learned so much about cooking, was to watching, you know, the stand and stir programs on Food Network. And this was probably like circa like early 2000s. So I really jumped at the chance to work at Food Network, but it was more on the photo side. But there's a lot of overlap because we're shooting photos of food. Right. I worked in the brand creative department. So we did a lot of really fun, like social and digital shoots, did like a revolving cake. It was like a zoetrope, but it was a cake, things like that. So that was really fun.
But I'm imagining, Irene, as you're doing these pop-ups, are you like calling your mom for recipes? And I mean, you're learning to cook as well at a production level.
Exactly. It was such a amazing crash course. I literally would go to like H Mart and stand in the aisles and call my mom and be like, okay, how do I buy salted shrimp? What's the best like kimchi I should buy? You know, I want to make like kalbi. How do you make it? And she was like classically like, okay, well, like a pinch of this and a handful of that, and then taste it. And I was like, what am I tasting for? But she and I share very much a love of like chasing our like taste memories. It's one of the chapters like I call out in my book, is just like, when we have something we love or something growing up, we really love trying to recreate that flavor at home. So that's something she did a lot as like an immigrant cook in America, trying to recreate the food that she grew up with in Korea. And then I've spent my whole life since trying to recreate the food that my mom makes.
Yeah, you talk about coming home from your summers in Seoul and that feeling that nostalgia for the food you ate while you were in Korea with your family in the summer.
Exactly.
Yeah. You're doing these pop-ups. You've got a day job. And this book, Soju Party, just came out. You opened Orion Bar, I think, just last year.
Mm-hmm.
How do you end up getting a book deal for a book about Korean drinking and eating culture before you've even got a bar?
So all of these things sort of happened concurrently, which was not by design, but very fortuitous, on both ends. So I left my corporate job like right around COVID, but then I kind of worked freelance and contract with them for a while. And the reason I left was because I really wanted to pursue my like freelance career. At that time, I kind of started to make more content online, like on Instagram. I wanted to start a YouTube channel. I wanted to write more. I just wanted to I've been working in corporate for like 12 years at that point. So I kind of like experienced the burnout a lot of people hit around that time. So I started writing and recipe developing more. I got some opportunities to contribute to like cookbooks here and there. One of them was the Nighthawk cookbook. So my husband, before we opened the bar together, he was the beverage director at Nighthawk Cinema for 10, 12 years. They were writing a cookbook. I had done a pop-up there for a couple movies. So I did one for Old Boy, and then later I did one for the movie Parasite. They wanted me to contribute some of the recipes that I made for that there. I also contributed to Dan Pashman from The Sporkful, his cookbook, Anything Possible. I also contributed to like Koji Alchemy, which is a book about fermentation. So I co-wrote a chapter about Meju, which is like this Korean fermentation blog. So I was just really just saying yes to like all the opportunities and things that was coming up. So the three parallel tracks are that in terms of how I got to writing a book about soju, Korean drinking was something I always just really took for granted. It's something I saw like my family do a lot growing up, but it's just something you see people do a lot. So I didn't think it was like all that interesting to share specifically until I started to. So originally, like my cousin showed me how to do like this thing called the soju tornado, just like this trick where you like make the liquid spin in it. And I like posted a video about that. I also had a friend like show me how to make something called a milky shot, which is this like layered bomb shot that you like chug. And then that went extremely viral. And I also did like a video about like how to drink soju. So then like these like little things sort of made me be like, oh, people are like really interested. That led to an article that I wrote for Food 52 about like how to drink soju. And then that was literally the article that triggered a publisher to reach out to be like, would you be interested in writing a cookbook? That was actually this editor, Claire Yee. I didn't end up writing the book with this publisher, but she like reached out and she was so supportive and so encouraging. And she was like, I think someone should write this book about Korean cocktails. I think you should be the person to write it. I read this article you wrote about the Korean drinking. I read this article you wrote about like the history of Korean rice, like just feel like you'd be the right person. I was like, oh, I would love to do that. But I want it to be like more than just Korean cocktails. I want it to be about like Korean drinking. And I had all these like, elements of it that I had already kind of parsed out. What was interesting is like, even though I contributed to cookbooks, I like never really thought I would write a cookbook because I was like the right type of person to write like a memoir cookbook. Like these are my family recipes. Maybe down the line I could do like something when we opened the bar or like something could come of that. But in the back of my mind, I was always like, if I were ever to write a cookbook, like what would be my forte? And I felt like Korean drinking was something that I hadn't seen. And I was like, I feel like I could be like the right person to write this book. And so when the opportunity came about, I was like, oh, okay, like maybe this is the time. And so that's kind of what kicked off that process.
So when you started off doing your pop-ups, you said around 2013 or so, Korean food was just not what it is today in America. People knew what kimchi was, but just knew what kimchi was maybe, and knew maybe what gochujang was, but didn't use it in the right way. And since then, there was just kind of this explosion it seems that you were kind of seeing this all happen while you were working corporate and thinking, I need to take part of this. It's an exciting thing to celebrate Korean culture. But what I think people who are listening to this podcast could take away is that you also were putting yourself out there. You were writing things, you were doing things, and you were making all these connections. So when opportunities came, people found you. Let me ask you this about just the writing part, because one of the things in this book is it's really well written. It's funny, it's charming. The introduction, it just grabs you right away. You want to just, you feel like you're hanging out with your relatives in Korea, at these bars. So have you always also been a writer?
Yeah, I think I've definitely always been a writer. I really loved writing when I was in high school, but it was like one of the, like, I have very much a tiger mom. She was very pushed me to do all the things all the time. But, in the quest of finding out what do I want to do in the world, I was like, I like writing. I do feel like I'm good at it, but wasn't necessarily something I like wanted to pursue. So originally I started food writing. It was actually, I think I was like talking to my colleague at the time, Eric Kim, who now writes for the New York Times. He was my colleague at Food Network. We worked there at the same time. I was telling him about just like how much I love Hanukkah, because I grew up in a really like Jewish neighborhood. And even though I'm Korean, like Hanukkah and Jewish food was one of the core comfort foods I did experience when I was a kid. So I was like gushing to him about this. He was like, oh, you should write an article about that. I was like, okay. So I did. And that was actually my first byline. There was like more that like opportunities that came up like with Food 52. And then the more I wrote, more people read and then like would reach out for those opportunities. But I did always enjoy writing. But since I did, I think I'm always like looking for new challenges, and it felt like something I could already do. But I was really excited to have the opportunity to explore it again.
The organization is so striking. It's organized around a night of drinking in Korea. Like, I'm learning through the way the book is organized as well. And we're curious how you landed on this idea. It's so original.
Oh, thank you. That I really give props to my editor, Tom Pold at Knopf. When I wrote this book, it was very much like full brain dump. I was like, here's all the history of Korean alcohol. Here's how to drink. Here's all the food. Here's all the cocktails. But understandably, it was a little like all over the place. Like, so he was like, we need to find a way to go through and figure out like the structure. So one of the pieces I did want to include, which was originally like just a sidebar, was what a Korean night out is. And so there's this concept of 1차, 2차, or like first round, second round, and so on. So I talk about 5, like my ideal Korean drinking night out, like 5 different rounds. It kind of starts with your drinking, you're eating, it peaks with like maybe you're doing karaoke, and it sort of like tapers off into you're doing a last round at home, you're having your hangover food, that sort of thing. So when he was like, you need to find a structure, I was like, oh, well, maybe it'll make sense for what if we did something like that. And then he also really pushed me to be like, let's separate out and call out which recipes are like traditional Korean drinks. Well, traditional, but just like things that stemmed from Korean culture that weren't like my recipes versus things that were. So that also helped. Is like in the book, there's like the first round, which is like easy Korean drinks. And a lot of those are things that have existed in like Korean pop culture for decades now. So most of them are not like my recipes per se. And then it sort of crests into different types of cocktails, drinking food, crests at like a party, and then tapers out into the hangover food.
So the drink recipes appear in different places depending on where those drinks might appear in your night of drinking, and the food recipes as well. At first I felt like, oh, the anju is going to be like the heart of the book. But it's not. There's just one section, and those are the foods you would eat at the bar, while drinking. But then there's, as you said, there's this whole party with more food recipes, and then there are more food recipes at the back for the hangover. And same with the cocktails; they appear in different chunks, and it actually carries through in a very original way.
Yeah. Because other cocktail books I had seen, there are lots of cocktail books that include food recipes, but it's often like kind of relegated to the back, or alternatively, you see them paired. It's like, pair this drink with this food. And so I did really go back and forth with like, should I do it that way? I did also know going into this, especially like as a chef and a cook, even though I wanted it to have a lot of drink recipes, I wanted it to have as many food recipes. So there's an equal number. There's about 30 drink recipes and 30 food recipes. And that was absolutely by design. In Korean drinking, you don't drink without eating. And in a lot of places, you are actually like required to order food rather than alcohol because alcohol is so cheap.
Right. You say the difference between American drinking, where it's a drink minimum, in Korean cultures, it's a food minimum.
Exactly.
Let me ask you how you created your recipe list, because can anything be anju? That must be kind of hard to narrow down.
Yeah, I mean, like anything can be anju. If you go to like the Korean convenience store, like any snack can be an anju. You can grab a bag of chips. That's technically an anju if you're having like a beer alongside with it. But there is specifically a category of food called anju. And some of it, again, it's like a little bit blurry. Like I call it, some recipes are things I've had since I was a kid with my family, and we would have them without alcohol. And there's very much an overlap also with like comfort foods that kids love, things like tteokbokki, which is like spicy rice cakes, or like odeng, which is like fish cakes. That is also an anju. And I think the common factor is that it's very like comforting for both kids and drunk adults. Mostly like my driving factor was things that I just love to eat. But there were a couple recipes I included that like I did ask like the people who follow me on Instagram to be like, oh, like, are there any anjus that you feel like have to be in this book? So a specific example of that is there's a recipe for dubu kimchi, just like tofu and spicy stir-fried pork, just not one of my favorite anjus, but it's a lot of other people's favorite anjus. So that I was like, well, I have to include that. It felt like I would do a disservice if I didn't.
Ah, good point. Did writing this book really kind of take you back to your family and your growing up, going to Korea? Did you just get more excited about those memories by working on this book?
Yeah, I think it's something I'm thinking about all the time. And I still go back to Korea very often for various reasons. Had actually gone to Korea like 4 times in 1 year prior to writing, like before I got the book deal. But I'd gone a lot. And every time I go, it's such an interesting exercise in like, it's an existential crisis of what is it like for me as like a Korean American visiting the motherland. I grew up going with my parents. What is it like for me to be an adult traveling here now? What will it be like when my parents are no longer here? How will I interact with the country and going back there? And also the country is changing. It's not like the place that I knew growing up. And so I'm thinking a lot about like how Korea has evolved since I was a kid, how I've evolved. Every time I go back, I'm always kind of chasing like, oh, this like specific cold noodle dish that I really liked. But then also needing to accept the fact that like maybe that doesn't exist anymore.
And also how being a Korean American has evolved too, like we were talking about earlier. And now you have a family of your own too. So I'm sure that adds another layer of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Like bringing like my son to Korea was like very important to me, and wanting to like infuse that culture and educate him on that, and traveling with like my family as a whole. It's really interesting seeing it through my parents' eyes, because now they lived in America for much longer than they lived in Korea. So they're also kind of recognizing, oh, wow, like we were really only like kids and young when we lived here. So we don't really know what like Korea is like either. But one thing I do know, and this is something my dad and I were talking about recently, is like Korean Americans have a really interesting outlook on Korean culture, because we're sort of in this like insider outsider perspective. Specifically, we were talking about it with like K-pop Demon Hunters, because he was like, the reason like it's done so well is because it's made by a Korean American director, and that her outside perspective allowed her to like infuse so many of these Korean elements that maybe a Korean director might not have thought of too specifically infused to make it feel like distinctly Korean.
That does make sense. Well, one thing too about this book is I could see you getting sort of asked by an editor saying, hey, would you want to do a book on Korean drinking culture? And you not being that excited about the idea. But in reading this book, there's so much excitement and reverence for Korean drinking culture, the history, and we'll get into how you wrote that history. But did you ever get pushback for having a book that is very centered around drinking culture? It seems like in these days, there's a lot of pushback from that.
Surprisingly, no. Like, I think when writing this book in general, I did really go into it expecting pushback from different things. And part of that is because I had seen colleagues experience that, and especially writing, I guess, like and more like ethnic book and that sort of thing. And, I also like listened to many episodes on here where like you've talked to different authors about that. And that's something I've heard people talk about. But surprisingly, no. I think if anything, it's something I experience a little bit more in the day to day of like running a bar. And that's like one of the challenges in running a bar in general is that people aren't drinking as much. People's interactions with alcohol are very much changing in a way that it's unclear yet if this will be like a permanent change. But in general, like people are drinking way less right now. Like the alcohol industry is the worst it's ever been since like prohibition. So it's really a struggle time in that aspect. But for me, like approaching this book, also, I'm talking a lot about like drinking culture in like a different country where like their relationship with it is different, though Koreans are also drinking less in general than in previous generations. Sometimes people are like, well, I don't really drink. Like, what can I get out of this book? And my goal with it was not about like, I'm going to teach you how to drink or this is how you should consume alcohol, even though that is a big part of it. But it's more about like the vibe and the culture and the party. I think that there's so much like you can still enjoy about like hanging out with people who are drinking, even if you're not drinking, or, creating a party atmosphere like at home, or just like finding different ways to like step into this culture, whether it's like through alcohol or not. So I think alcohol is just like the medium or the vehicle, but it's not necessarily something that you have to like partake in to enjoy it.
Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense. And also, I mean, in a way, I'm thinking about some of especially the more modern sojus that are very low alcohol. Some of these descriptions of these long nights, I'm like, oh my gosh. And then I was looking at these drinks. I'm like, the drinks themselves are not like a, shot of tequila or something. Mm-hmm. So I could see that there's sort of a middle road there. It's not all about high alcohol.
Right. It's more about having a long night with friends. It's more of a celebration of like being together and eating and drinking. Like drinking is part of it, but there's so much food. Like you said, you have to have food on the table. This isn't just, American bar style where you're just doing shots.
Exactly.
The rituals around it. So how did you go about doing all I mean, you said when you turned in your first manuscript, it was really already filled with all this history and this academic research. And so we're just curious how you conducted all this research. Where'd you get all your information?
So yeah, there's no other book about Korean drinking that's written in English. There is one academic book called Soju that I did get and read. That helped me a lot with like the history of soju and Korean alcohol in general. I got my cousin who was flying in from Korea to bring me some books in Korean. So that was a challenge for me. I am fluent in Korean, but I'm not like regularly reading, especially like, books and in Korean. So I use that a lot. I did a lot of YouTube research. That was very fun. So things like drinking games and more like pop culture related type things. There's a lot of like YouTube content about like K-pop idols doing different drinking games, or like Korean dramas where people are like drinking. So that's very much like of the culture. That was the fun part of it. But yeah, I got a lot of my research from Korean language books.
It's really useful for me. I never quite understood how much alcohol was in soju because I would hear things like, oh, it's really low alcohol, or, oh, it's high alcohol. And you spell it out so well about how it's actually changed over time and how it's also not Korean sake. Just talk us a little bit about that, because I thought you had this little sidebar and it was just very helpful.
Yeah, it was so much of my writing and research in general, like really stems from like questions I ask myself all the time. And I think that's sort of what drives my curiosity. Is growing up, like would see like my uncles drink a lot of soju, and they would casually be like, oh, soju is not as alcoholic as it used to be. Or I would just see all these green bottles and be like, why are they all green? Are they made by the same company? Is this like a government mandate? So I think that led a lot of the research. I read into like why there's such a disparity in the types of alcohol content. And that like really pulled an interesting string where Soju specifically used to be more like traditionally distilled liquor, a little bit more akin to like a vodka, but that got very like industrialized during the Japanese occupation and the Korean War. Then it became more of like a marketing thing. So then they were like just all the different companies were like using the same like government produced ethanol, making their own formulas, but all just sort of very similar tasting, and then all like produced in these like same glass bottles. And then over the course of time, if you're all selling the same thing, the only thing you have is marketing and like reasons or like production changes and stuff. So I think a lot of Korean companies were chasing like, how do we make our products seem fresh again? And then also I think, or also like trying to convince people like, how do you purchase more soju by maybe making a little bit less alcoholic? And then they went a little bit too far, and then they're like, okay, well, we're going to bring it back up. So there's really been a range over time.
Yeah, you have the timeline.
Talk about the green bottle, just on the recycling.
Yeah, so when you are making a product that is largely like ethanol and water and sweeteners, your main production cost is your bottling. So in Korea, they have an insanely intricate recycling system, which is extremely successful because it is extremely intricate. I think they like successfully recycle like 97% of their.
Wow.
Yeah, it's like the success rate is wild, but part of this is because they've done so much work to like socialize and kind of industrialize the recycling. So one of the things they did was they wanted, instead of having all these different bottles, which soju used to come in all these different bottles. And then they're like, okay, well, we want, I think it was like brown bottles for home drinking and blue bottles for commercial drinking. But then all the restaurants were like secretly using all the home bottles. So
because they
didn't want to, because they were, and they didn't want to like pay taxes on it. And then they're like, okay, well, we're going to make them all blue. So actually they were all blue initially until one of the companies launched a product called green soju, and they put it in a green bottle because they wanted to feel like fresh and natural. And then that was like a huge hit. So then all the other companies started doing that. And then that really stuck, the green bottle. I think the green bottles have been in existence for probably like 20, 30 years now. And then just now recently, there's been the opposite, where one of the companies, Jinro, was like, well, we're going to do like a retro throwback bottle to the blue bottle. Then they made a product called Jinro's Back. And that was a huge hit, and that has since inspired other companies to start to branch out with the bottles.
But on your book tour, you went with green for your outfits to symbolize the green bottle.
Yeah, I'm so glad you noticed that because, going into my book tour, having all these different book events, and especially as like a woman, you have to like really think about like, all the different fun outfits you want to wear to show up to celebrate the book. So I went with a very green theme. I found like this like green linen jumpsuit a few months ago with my mom and my sister, and I was like, this is the outfit. And then all my other outfits, I've like infused different like elements of green to sort of celebrate the green bottle soju.
I like it. And it's also just, it simplifies everything. You have so much to think about on a book tour. Just like have your uniform all set and have it tied to the book. It's pretty smart.
We're talking a lot about soju, and the title of the book is Soju. I want to ask about that, but to be clear, the book is not just about soju. We talk about beer, you talk about wine, you talk about all the different alcohols that are part of the Korean drinking culture. So was the title Soju Party, was that your original title?
Yes, my editor wants it to be very clear that this is not a book just about soju. Right. But I think the name has really taken off. So when I wrote the proposal, this was the name that I had on the proposal. It was actually, I was going back and forth. Originally it was like Korean drinks or Korean alcohol. And I was like, sounds all so boring. So I was like lamenting about it to my friend, Christina Che, who is also a recipe developer and a writer. She was formerly at Bonap. She actually came up with this name. And then she was like, what about like how to drink parentheses and eat like a Korean? And I was like, oh my God, this is so perfect. I really wanted to include soju and Korean in the name because from a search perspective, I knew that, and part of my proposal was showing that like the search queries for soju have been going up, as well as that for just Korean food or Korean whatever in general. So that was a little bit on purpose. And then also I just liked Soju Party because it was very joyous and joyful. And I wanted to convey that this is a fun book. Like, yes, it'll have history and drinking rules and all these things, but don't feel like you have to be like bound to that. It's about having fun.
How did you work with your agent on the proposal?
I talked with Claire and we had like an initial talk, and then she was like, okay, well, so next steps, find a book agent and then write a proposal and then come back to me. And I was like, okay. And by this point, I knew I was pregnant. So I was like, had a very much a ticking clock. So that was in June of 2023. And I was due February of 2024. So I was like, okay, well, the time is ticking. Let's make this happen. So she introduced me to Danielle, my agent. So she was actually the first agent I talked to. I also did talk to like 4 other agents as well. Everyone was so amazing, and it was like so awesome to talk to, especially like all of these like female book agents who were also like supportive and excited, and also really good to hear sort of about like, does this book make sense for the market for when it's coming out? So everyone was very supportive. I also separately had gotten an opportunity to contract write for a second cookbook at the same time. So I was actually selling 2 books at once. So I kind of had like a unique situation. I really liked Danielle because she's so supportive and encouraging, and just also like no nonsense, open book. And that's like definitely my style of person. She sent me some example proposals, as did Claire, and that was really helpful for me to write the proposal. The proposal I took the most inspiration from was actually Frankie Gau's First Generation. I mean, if you know Frankie, he's such a visually minded person. So his proposal is beautiful. And I'm also a very visually minded person. And with like a photo production background, I've done a lot of like PowerPoints and stuff. So most proposals are very much like a Word doc with all the different bullet points. And his was a PowerPoint with slides. And I was like, ooh, that's the key. This I can do. So I like plowed through the proposal and like made all the design things, and like I did like illustrations, lots of graphics and photos. And I was just like, just want to like sell this proposal in like the first 5 seconds of looking through it. Danielle went back and forth on it a little bit, and then she took it to Claire. So they kind of had like the first pass at it. She ended up pitching it to a bunch of other publishers, and we had a lot of interest. So we actually ended up going to auction with it, which was amazing.
Yes.
So it was a pitch deck.
Yeah, I think it was like a 20-page pitch deck.
Yeah, it makes sense now looking at the book, because the graphic and design elements are so distinctive and so much a part of the story. I mean, just holding this book, I've been carrying it around because I'm getting ready for this interview. And I realized I don't usually do that. I kind of put the book down and sit and read it. But there's something about this book. It fits in your bag. It goes upstairs, downstairs. You go like it has this great weight to it. And like even just the shine on the cover.
The glass in the center.
Yeah.
If you put it on the side, you can see like a little like glimmer over the bottle in the glass, which is really, really fun.
How similar is the end result to what you imagined, and then just your involvement in the overall design?
Putting it together, the proposal, I did also want to communicate the visual style, because also like I had a visual style, especially coming from making the content online, and I had already sort of these templates for things I had made, like making my media kit or making my resume or making my website. There's already these like branding elements. So I wanted to infuse that into the pitch deck, especially for someone who might not know who I am. Is like, that's a really good way just to communicate like who I am as a person and what I'm capable of. So I think that was really helpful in sort of convincing my publisher, Knopf, that you should include me into the conversation, that I would like to have an input in design. My background is photo, and then also most authors obviously like usually produce their own photo shoots. So that was a clear part that I was going to take on. But with the design, I like did really want to like be a big part of it. But I had heard from some of my other colleagues that sometimes like usually like publishers don't love when you're like, I have design feedback or questions. But I think with the proposal, and then also I did make like a mood board and share that and my inspiration. And then ultimately like the book has both like this amazing, vibrant photography as well as these illustrations that actually my sister illustrated. And so I think those really did help to push the design of the book itself.
I really want to hear about the photo shoot because the photos are, there's vibrant doesn't even begin to describe them. And also you're in a lot of the photos. Yes, there are photos of the food and the cocktails and very sort of what we expect, but there's also a lot of parties and people. And so just tell us about the whole photo shoot, how it came together.
My background is as a photo producer, so this is definitely the part I was most excited about. This was also the part where I called in all of my industry favors. So working in photo production, a lot of photographers can like work with sometimes big budgets or small budgets. And so this one, obviously, like most cookbooks have very low budgets. But I was really like fortunate and grateful to have worked with my friend Hemi Lee. She was the photographer on my friend James's book, Chili Crisp, where I saw a little bit of her interaction on that. I felt like she would be perfect for this book because she's Korean. She loves to drink. She's a little bit older than me, so I know that she has like a lot of those sort of nostalgic throwback things that I really wanted to include into the book. And the food stylist was Eugene Cho, who is someone I've like long admired in the industry as a food stylist. And so he was so excited to work on this book because he doesn't do a lot of cookbooks and he had never done a Korean cookbook, and it's also Korean, so he wanted to explore that. And then the prop stylist, Maggie DeMarco, is not Korean, but I think this was also her first cookbook. She's all since worked on like 5 more just in the past like couple years. But she was so eager and excited to like dive into all of the different references. So again, for this one, I made an extensive deck, just like every recipe. I was like, this is my reference. These are my thoughts.
When you say this is my reference, what is the reference there?
So sometimes it was like the reference was, so you do this a lot with like photo shoots in general, is like you want to visually communicate like what you want the photo to be. So for me, I did want there to be room for creativity because I'm hiring all these like amazing people and I wanted them to infuse their thoughts and ideas into it. But I wanted to be like, this is my jumping off point. So sometimes it's like the head note, but sometimes it was like a photo from my childhood of like me and my parents. Or like, for example, there was like, I really wanted to include this table. It's like this like mother of pearl, like abalone table that I grew up with. I like sourced it on eBay. I really wanted to use this as like a prop surface. So for example, a photo of that. Or I included a lot of like music video references just because like, for example, there's one recipe that is inspired by a recipe that this guy Key from this group Shiny like made something called a key tonic, which went very viral in Korea. So I included that. And then I was like, okay, well, here's a specific like Shiny music video that I love. And then the prop stylist like pulled a lot of those like visual references in her fabrics and stuff. So these are all just super like insidery things, but that's like what brought me so much joy, like doing this photo shoot. It's sort of marrying like the old and the new. So just any time you're doing a photo shoot like this and you include as much like visual references as possible, it's really helpful for the people working on it to be able to interpret your vision.
Can I just ask you about the Spam recipe?
Yeah.
Describing how it looks, there are sort of cans of Spam, but there's ice in it, there's drinks, there's a straw, there's a little like green plate with like little, seared pieces of Spam. This is a very inventive way of looking at like a photo shoot. So just tell me a little bit more specific on like how a photo like that kind of comes together.
So the spam recipe is for a spam cocktail. I have these plastic spam cans that are drink cans that I received from a friend of mine who had they had a party and which spam sponsored, and then they had all these drink cans left over. And they're like, "Does anyone want these?" And I was like, "Oh, I do, because I'm going to open a bar and I really want to have a spam." I was like, "I'm going to figure it out. I'm just going to retrofit this cocktail into the spam can." So they're not the actual spam metal cans.
Got it.
And the green plate is really iconic too, because it's like a Korean snack plate. So that's a little bit like, if you know, you know, that's sort of like Melanie plastics. Punshik plates is what they're called. And that's what they often serve things like kimbap or sundae or like tteokbokki on, because they're like easy to clean.
Ah, I see.
And that photo appears in the Chasing Taste Memories chapter.
Yeah.
So there's this multi-layered meta kind of referential nature to all of this. And it's like a maximalism when you look at it. But I'm so glad to hear you talk about it, because there's a richness to these photos that goes beyond just the visual richness. It's just packed with all this information that even if you don't know, you know, you notice. Is that another thing? You don't know, you notice?
Right. If you don't know, you notice. Yeah.
Exactly.
You appear quite often in the photos too, which is all part of the branding and makes a lot of sense.
That wasn't actually on purpose, even though it might seem like it was. So when I did the photo shoot, I actually ended up doing 3 different photo shoots. So there's the studio shoot where you shoot all the recipes. I broke that out into 2. So the first one I did in studio at the food stylist's house. I did like a little mini offshoot shoot at my house. And part of that was because I have all of this stuff. That was on purpose. I did want to infuse elements of my home into it, because that's something like people have been seeing and loving in general. And I wanted to really couch it in a home perspective rather than just a studio perspective. And then I also wanted to shoot at the bar, at Orion Bar, but we were still in the midst of construction, which is why I kind of ended up being a little bit separate. So a lot of the drinks are shot at the bar. And then I wanted to infuse sort of this lifestyle element into it. So we did a photo shoot where we actually did the 5 rounds of drinking night out that I talk about in my book, where we went to all my favorite places in Koreatown, New York. Oh. The whole crew came along, and mostly people were just there to hang out. And then Hemi was taking all the photos. I was so surprised when I got the design and I opened, and the first page is me. I am a bit drunk singing karaoke. And then the last page is also me, another shot of me doing karaoke. And a lot of those help to give that feeling of what it feels like when you go and drink with Koreans.
And it's so hard to just stage that in a studio. It's great that you went out and this was real life. Yeah. So how did you write it, though? Did you write it with a design template in mind?
I did not go into it being prescriptive about I want it to be designed like this. I think there's charts here and there. So those I was this needs to be a table, or this needs to be a map or something.
Just in brackets, or make it as a table or something like that. And
no, I literally in the Word doc made the table and then I said, okay, here's how it should
Got it.
look. But no, otherwise it was just a Microsoft Word dump, which was so hard to edit. Writing it, I just dumped it. But we did 2 rounds of edits before it went into design. And then there was also the copy edit. And I was my eyes were bleeding from writing. It was nothing compared to editing. It was truly the most painful thing I've ever gone through in the Microsoft Word doc. Because one of the things they don't tell you about Microsoft Word is how extremely draining it is on your computer.
Oh.
Coming from photo, things like Photoshop or Adobe Premiere, these are naturally very draining on your computer. But Microsoft Word is a sneaky little bastard. You
and it
think
crashes.
Your Word doc is you think it's only 120 kilobytes, and then you open it and then it's
Do you remember the word count for your first draft?
I think it was around 33,000, I want to say.
Oh.
Yeah, that was interesting because in my contract, I think there was a word count. And then I was asking Danielle, my agent, I was oh my God, do I have to hit this? Because originally I did not. So I
Got
think
it.
originally I was not very close, but in my first draft, I turned it in with just some sections where I was like, TK,
To come,
a
right?
whole
Yeah.
Yeah.
section that I had not written.
You pack a lot of history
Yeah.
and information. I mean, I learned so much reading this.
Oh, thank you. But yeah, no, surprisingly, very little was edited out. Again, I just went with the word dump and I assumed that we would cut recipes or that we would cut sections. And no, I mean, like Tom was like so supportive in terms of just like, this is your book, like make it what you want. He was very helpful in sort of guiding and putting together the pieces and all the design elements like that all really came from the designer. I think I did have very many like sidebars or things, so there was a little bit of like shuffling around of those things to put them in places where they made sense, but a lot of like, you know, the sort of like the side quest questions of like, is soju Korean sake, like, you know, that's naturally came around like the soju section, or like different like the tables of pairing Korean alcohol with food, like came like when we were introducing like the anju section and stuff. So it kind of did flow naturally just in the way I wanted it to be laid out. But in terms of the fun design elements, that was all the designer.
I'm curious to know if there was another element of challenge with copy editing recipes where you have ingredients that might have multiple names. In your book, you use dashima for kelp. But if people are going to say a Whole Foods, they'll probably see kombu. Not everyone will know it's the same thing. In the back, you explain what things are. You lead with the Korean word for most of it. Were those decisions that you made and then you had to talk with your editor and copy editor about what words to use in the ingredient list?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that is part of what made editing so hard, was because every time I was editing, I was having existential crises about like, what am I going to call this ingredient? Because it comes in so many different names. It's also extra challenging with like Korean ingredient names and Japanese ingredient names because there is sort of this fraught history, obviously. So sometimes like Koreans don't love when you call things the Japanese name, even though that is more colloquially maybe what it's called in America. So that's something I did struggle with a lot. I went into it, I really wanted to go into this making sure that like there's the romanization of it followed by the Korean actual lettering for it. And it's because Korean romanization, like the Englishification of Korean language, there's two different standards. Either way, they're just very hard to read. Even if you're a native Korean and English speaker like me, you read it and like it's hard to pronounce. So that's why I wanted to make sure I had the actual Korean word in case you were like, what is this? Maybe you could like take a picture of it and like look it up that way. These days, at the very least, there's like we have access to such great technology where you can take a picture of something and it'll romanize it, or you can search it and stuff. So I definitely wanted to include that. But it was really also hard to keep track of like making sure that it was consistent across the board, across all the different recipes, because sometimes like when I'm writing, I just like go back and forth. And then sometimes there's a lot of things that are like brand names. You mentioned tashi ma, which is the kelp. There's also tashi ta, which is a brand name for a Korean like soup stock powder. But there's only that one brand that makes product. So we just call it tashida. So if you tell a Korean cook, they'll know what that is. Like stuff like that was like when, you know, and oftentimes editors are like, do we have to say the brand name? And I'm like, yes, because it's the only one that exists.
Right.
Irene, who's the audience for this book? I mean, I know for your YouTube, it's Korean American content for Korean American viewers. But when I read this book, I mean, I'm a long way from a Korean American. And yet I feel like I'm the audience for this book because I learned so much. I found recipes I want to make. I learned about drinking culture, traditions that are really fascinating to me. I'm curious, as you were going into it, who do you envision as the audience, and did that change across the writing of the book?
I feel like naturally my audience, like I want to talk in a shorthand. My writing, I prefer a little bit like I don't want to like dumb it down for people. I want to be like, just come in, you'll figure out the context clues as you go. So that's a little bit more my writing style. My editor definitely wanted to make sure like, please keep in mind that this is an intro book. This should be like 101. We kind of do need to explain to people like who've never interacted with it before. In my proposal, my audience was specifically millennials and Midwesterners.
Really?
Yeah, so the idea was that Asian American millennials specifically, like people who are like really interested in exploring their culture or other cultures, anyone who's interested in exploring like Korean and Korean American culture. You know, these people like maybe love going to Korean barbecue. They have bought a bottle of soju before. Maybe they don't really know what to do with it. And then this is sort of an entry point. And then I also said Midwesterners because like my husband is Midwestern. And so it was very much like I wanted it to be a book that like my mother-in-law could read and be like, I get it. Like I wanted there to be a shorthand for like Koreans and Asians, and then also have it be something where it didn't feel like foreign for someone who didn't know anything about it.
Yeah, that's a tricky balance, but I think you reached it here. So many layers to this book. I think anyone who is looking for a book that just feels very fun, a celebration of Korean culture, and also just people who are maybe working on a cookbook and want to think of an alternative way to organize recipes, I think this is a really good sample.
Blurring lines of book genres too.
I've been seeing it in different places in different bookstores, so that's been really interesting.
Yeah, definitely. What did you set out to do with this book? And do you feel like you achieved it?
Oh, I really wanted to just share the joy of Korean food and Korean drinking and like Korean culture in general. I did really want to educate people in terms of why do we do this? Where does this come from? But then also like really encourage people to make it their own. Korean drinking is not something you only have to do like when you're eating Korean barbecue. Do this at home, have your own party. So I hope that like really comes through. I hope that there's like something that everyone can find some joy in.
Thank you so much for talking to us. And again, congratulations on this book.
Yeah, congrats.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Everything Cookbooks. For more about each episode, subscribe to our newsletter at everythingcookbooks.substack.com. Here are other ways to support the show. Go to everythingcookbooks.com and check out our totes, t-shirts, sweatshirts, and other merch. Or buy us a round of coffee. You can also leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcast or wherever you listen. Thank you to our editor, Abby Cirquitella. Until next time, keep on writing, reading, and cooking.